Hey, did you know that Muhammad was in the Bible? At least that's the story that some Muslims like to tell. Doesn't stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny, though. That's what we're here today to find out. And I wouldn't be getting your hopes up because, yeah, it's not going to go well, but hopefully it'll be entertaining, and I guess that's the most we can hope for. So, we're back today with yet another video suggested by Toaster, and I want to thank Toaster for routinely coming up with new ideas. If you want to do it, you can do that in the comments on any video. Just send a direct link to the video you want me to look at, or through email. The link is down in the description. However you want to do it, get it to me and I will take a look. Anyway, we're going to go back to the well of Muslim stupidity and look at a video by Rhyad Muslim, who we've done before, in a video called Prophet Muhammad in the Bible. Somehow, I don't think we're going to find Muhammad in the Bible, but then again, you never know, do ya? We might just be surprised. So let's see.
This is one of the clearest prophecies of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the Bible.
Okay. Since there is no direct or demonstrable mention of Muhammad anywhere in the Bible, sure, I guess. Now, granted, I figure he's going to do what desperate Christians have been doing for a long time. If you can't get where you want to go, just read into it and pretend it was there all along. Of course, that is not remotely credible, but since when have any of these people actually cared? This is why, when you start to talk about prophecy, the vast majority of it is all make-believe. But this is what it really meant. Well, how did you come to that conclusion? Who'd you talk to get that information? Because I don't think you did. What's really going on is it fit in with their emotionally comforting presuppositions, because that's always it. So I figure we're just up for more of that. Let's see if I'm right.
In Isaiah 42, the chapter starts by saying that a very special person will be sent to bring justice to the nations.
And you're just going to read into that in a way that fits your blind faith. But that doesn't mean that's what it means. It's why Christians like to pull this with Jesus. Well, it sounds good to us, but that doesn't make it true. And this isn't the only passage in the Bible that Muslims claim is talking about their pedophile prophet. You'll often get Deuteronomy 18:18 or Deuteronomy 33:2 brought up, as well as Song of Songs 5:16, Daniel 7, and Haggai 2:7. There's even more stuff in the New Testament, but I think we'll try to stick closer to what's being claimed here. Now, I'm going to let him get on with it, and then we'll just go and debunk it all. It's only fair after all, but this is just another case of religious cherry picking and seeing what you want to see, rather than what's actually or demonstrably there. All religions do it, and all religions are wrong.
Then the chapter continues and says, "Let the settlements where Kedar lives rejoice, let the people of Selah sing for joy, let them shout from the mountaintops."
Yep, that's what it says. It's also about here where they stop reading because they've reached the conclusion that they were desperate to reach all along. This is why religion gets things wrong so much of the time. They aren't concerned about the truth. They only want to get to their emotionally comforting conclusions that they reached for non-intellectual reasons. And this happens in Christianity all the time, which I am going to keep bringing up because this isn't just a Muslim problem. It's a religion problem. So many supposed prophecies of Jesus can be entirely debunked by just reading on in the chapter. You find out really fast that the verse isn't really about Jesus any more than this is about Muhammad. It's about some other person described in the text a couple of verses later. Also in Isaiah, for instance, is Isaiah 53:5, which Christians love to claim was a prediction of Jesus' death on the cross. You have to read all the way through to the end of the chapter, though, and it's really clear that the suffering servant wasn't Jesus at all. So keep that in mind. I'm sure it's going to come up in a moment.
These verses clearly give us a location where this person will be sent, and that is A, the settlements where Kedar lives, and B, in a place called Selah.
And for some reason you think nobody's ever lived there before? Uh-huh. Now, keep in mind, we don't have a lot of verifiable historical information about Muhammad, any more than we know anything demonstrable about Jesus. It's why they had to write that he came from both Bethlehem and Nazareth in the New Testament, so that they could keep the dueling prophecies in the Old Testament happy. So let's sort of look at this so far. Isaiah 42, 1 through 4 is one of the servant songs which are scattered throughout Isaiah. They include things like 49, 1 through 6, 50, 4 through 7, 52, 13 through 53, 12, and I told you to remember that because it all plays in. If you just read Isaiah instead of just cherry-picking verses throughout, it identifies who the suffering servant actually is. In verses like 42, 8 through 9, 44, 1, 44, 21, 45, 4, 48, 20, and 49, 3, the text clearly identifies the servant as Israel itself. According to John Barton and John Muddyman, they wrote that the idea of a servant played a small part in earlier chapters, being used as a designation of the unworthy Elikim in 22:20 and of the fatigue of David in 37:35. But it now comes to the fore as a description of major significance. The noun being used more than 20 times in chapters 40 through 55, its first usage is obviously important in establishing the sense in which we are to understand it. And here it is clear that the community of Israel and Jacob is so described. It's a community, it's not a person. It's kind of like when they say Jesus will come from Bethlehem, but that's not actually the Bethlehem that the Old Testament is talking about. And it's also not Jesus. That was a tribe as well. So this is not Muhammad. It's not Jesus. It's Israel. You're just being dumb.
By checking any Bible dictionary, we can see that Kedar was the second son of Ishmael, and he lived in northwest Arabia, which is the region of modern-day Saudi where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born.
So what? It's also the big landmass that the Israelites supposedly tramped through for 40 years on their way back from Egypt. Granted, that never happened either. It's all myth, but this is just clutching at straws on the part of the Muslims. They are so desperate to tie their own religious mythology back to the Bible because without that, they really have zero validity whatsoever. They're just willing to clutch at straws and wishful thinking to get anywhere remotely close to appearing true. And that's why all of this is just interpretation, not evidence. It's not actually proving anything of substance.
If that's not enough, then even the lineage of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, can be traced back to Ishmael directly through Kedar.
Really? And how do you know that other than tradition? Because Muhammad claimed descent, but we have no actual demonstrable records proving that said descent is true. Everything they have is tradition, and tradition doesn't mean anything. This is just taking your religion seriously when it cannot be independently verified. I mean, they claim that Muhammad can be traced all the way back to Adam, and that's not actually real. There was no real Adam, just like there was no real Eve. It's all mythology, worse the farther that you go back.
Now, what about Selah? Guys, using Google Maps, we can see that Mount Selah is literally in the city of Medina, where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established Islam.
And, again, how many people have ever lived in Medina? Even if this was a prophecy, which, as we've already showed, it isn't, but even if it was, who says that it's referring to Muhammad? Oh, well, we really like Muhammad, so it's got to be him. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. This is like going through the New York City phone book, finding someone named Peter Parker, and asserting that's gotta be Spider-Man. And just for the hell of it, Peter Parker, the character in the comic books, he lived at 20 Ingram Street, at least according to a 1989 comic, and that's actually a real address in Queens. People still send letters to this day to that address trying to get a hold of Spider-Man. And the people who once lived there, who, funny enough, were actually the Parkers at one point, they started collecting the letters. They are now on display at the town hall as part of a Dear Spider-Man museum. And you can go look at that right now. And that's actually kind of cool.
It honestly gets better. The chapter in Isaiah continues and says that the Lord will march out like a champion and will triumph over his enemies.
Remember, this is Israel we're talking about here, not Muhammad. That's just the kind of thing that the Israelites would say about their suffering servant. But this is just cherry picking, which is what the religious love to do. Pull the stuff that makes your side look good and just ignore all the stuff that proves it wrong. And I trust nobody's actually surprised.
Now, if you look into the biography of the Prophet, you'll see he was attacked over and over again during his prophethood, and he triumphed over every single one of them.
Well, that's your story. This is no different than saying, but, it's in the Bible. Yeah, I don't care. This is just absurd cherry picking done because the religious are desperately to get where they're emotionally predisposed to go. But that doesn't make any of it true. This is just reading into things because that's what you really want to believe. But wanting to believe doesn't mean anything. This is really where the religious go wrong so often, because they are desperately trying to herd reality toward their emotionally comforting conclusion instead of just learning about the proper conclusion from reality. Well, it just has to be about Muhammad. Really? Why? Because we want it to be. But that doesn't mean anything, does it? Just because you can draw some parallels, that doesn't mean anything, especially since it's all just simple interpretations. Come back when you've got something demonstrable.
And finally, Isaiah 42 then says, "But those who trust in idols and say to images, 'You are our gods,' will be turned back in utter shame." In other words, this person is to be sent to a pagan society that worshipped idols, which summarizes perfectly pre-Islamic Arabia.
And just about everywhere else. Because here's the thing. When a new religion comes along, and it doesn't matter which one, pick any of them, but when a new religion comes along, they all face an uphill battle in converting the unbelievers. This could apply to virtually anyone, anywhere. It could apply to Christians. It could apply to Muslims. It could apply to Hindus. It could apply to anybody. Anytime they go to a new area and they start to preach, they are surrounded by unbelievers. So this once again is just saying, well, that sounds familiar, without realizing that it sounds familiar to pretty much everybody.
As you can see, guys, this is undeniable evidence. There is no other man that fits this description other than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Other than, tons of other people. And that's assuming that this was a prophecy in the first place, which, if you just read Isaiah, it's obvious that it wasn't. This is what happens when you read into things based on your blind faith and wishful thinking, instead of actually seeking out independent evidence. The reality is what matters, not your overactive fantasy life. Oh, well, it says this vague thing in a book that if I just squint right, I can interpret it in a way that gets me to the belief that I'm really, really fond of, therefore it's true. Yeah, and unfortunately for them, that is not how a credible prophecy needs to work. Prophecies, by their very nature, if we're to take them seriously at all, they need to be specific and definite. They would have to say, well, in 1400 years, this guy named Muhammad is going to be born in Medina, and he's going to do X, Y, and Z. Because nothing less will do. It can't just refer to a huge group of potential people. if you interpret it that way, if it refers to anyone at all, because we still have no reason to think that this is a prophecy or that it refers to anything but Israel itself, and just leave it up to believers to fight over who it had to be. So, no, I'm just not at all convinced. And I don't think that anybody who isn't already a believer ever would be.
And in fact, this passage in Isaiah is the reason why there were so many Jews in Arabia at the time. They had no reason to be there, yet they moved there because their scholars knew that a new prophet was to be sent to that location. And when that prophet went to Medina, a lot of them converted to Islam.
Another convenient story, because that's really all any of this is. It's faith and fifis insisting that the object of said faith and fifis must be true because, well, of course it is. Because otherwise faith and fifis wouldn't mean anything. Because otherwise these people will be really, really, really sad, and you can't have that. This is the very definition of confirmation bias. It's coming to a belief and then looking for things to justify it, even if they don't actually exist. It's just searching for clues where no clues exist because you are irrationally convinced that there's been a crime. That rock, yeah, that rock right there, that has to mean something because, fill in the blank. Except that rock doesn't actually mean anything. It just sat there doing nothing until you came along with a cockamamie idea in your head and gave it some kind of imaginary relevance. Or at least you think that you did. It's still just a rock though, and you are just an idiot. Anyway, let's all thank Toaster once again, who has come through with interesting videos quite a few times now. In fact, there's another Rhyad Muslim video in the queue, thanks to him, which I'll give a little bit of time for breathing room before we come back to it. I think it's painfully obvious just how far out there these Muslim apologists are. They, like their Christian brethren, they're all out of their ever-loving minds. They just want to believe. And it's too bad it makes them look so ridiculous.
Boom, 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 boom.